3 weeks ago, I walked into a Phoenix courtroom and signed away my entire life. I gave my ex-husband the 5-bedroom house, the cars, and the business. He leaned in, whispering that I finally knew my place while his mistress snapped a selfie. I simply smiled and said thank you. 47 seconds later, the color drained from his face when his attorney finally read the fine print. My name is Kennedy Gray. I am 33 years old. And 3 weeks ago, I sat in a courtroom in Phoenix with my hands folded neatly in my lap, playing the role of the defeated woman exactly as they expected me to. The air in the courtroom was stale, recycled, and smelled faintly of floor wax and the heavy musky cologne my husband had started wearing 6 months ago. It was the scent of a man who believed he was reinventing himself. To everyone watching, this was a slaughter, a foolish, broken wife surrendering the kingdom to the king who claimed he built it. They thought I was losing my mind, or perhaps just my nerve. They were wrong. I was not losing anything. I was waiting. People often talk about the silence in a courtroom, but it is never truly silent. There is the hum of the air conditioning, the rustle of synthetic fabrics, the scratching of a stenographer's keys. On this particular morning, there was also the distinct, rhythmic tapping of a manicured fingernail against a designer handbag. I did not have to turn around to know who it was. Marjorie Harlan, my mother-in-law, was sitting in the gallery directly behind Grant's legal team. She was positioned there like a monarch overseeing an execution. Her spine stiff, her silver hair coiffed into a helmet of unshakable judgment. She was likely smiling that thin, razor-sharp smile she reserved for waitstaff she intended to undertip, and daughters-in-law she intended to discard. Next to her sat Sienna Price, 28 years old. She was wearing a red dress that was entirely too bright for a legal proceeding. The kind of red that screams for attention in a room full of gray suits and wood paneling. I could hear the soft, digital shutter sound of her phone. She was taking selfies. She was documenting her victory lap before the race had even officially ended. I imagined the caption she was typing out at that very moment. Something about new beginnings. Something about true love winning. I kept my eyes forward, at the plaintiff's table. My husband, Grant Harlan, adjusted his cuff. The movement was deliberate, designed to flash the heavy gold watch on his left wrist. It was a new acquisition, a Patek Philippe that cost more than my first car. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery and was merely waiting for the check to clear. He turned his head slightly, catching my eye. His face was flushed with the adrenaline of absolute conquest. "You are finally making sense, Kennedy," he mouthed. It was a whisper, but in the acoustic bowl of the room, it hit me like a physical blow. "About time you learned your place." I did not flinch. I did not glare. I simply looked at him, softened my eyes, and offered a small, trembling smile. It was the smile of a woman who had nothing left to fight with. "Thank you," I whispered back. Beside him, his lawyer, Preston Vale, was stacking documents with the efficiency of a machine. Preston was one of those attorneys who charged $700 an hour to intimidate people. He had a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite and a suit that cost $5,000. He radiated confidence, but there was a tightness around his eyes today, a microscopic tension in his neck. He wanted this over. He wanted the win on his record before lunch. My own lawyer, a sharp, terrifyingly competent woman named Janine, sat beside me. She was the only person in the room, other than me, who knew the truth. She had spent the last 10 minutes pretending to plead with me in hushed tones, playing her part in the theater we had choreographed. She tapped a pen against her legal pad, feigning frustration. "Mrs. Harlan," the judge said. His voice was gravelly, tired. Judge Keller had seen thousands of divorces. He had seen screaming matches and sobbing breakdowns. He clearly did not know what to make of this quiet capitulation. He peered over his reading glasses, looking directly at me. "I want to be absolutely certain you understand the gravity of the document before you. You are dismissing your counsel's advice?" I stood up slowly. I kept my posture slightly slumped, my hands clasping each other as if for support. "Yes," Your Honor, you understand, Judge Keller continued, his brow furrowing, that by signing this marital settlement agreement, you are waiving your right to any future claim on the marital residence located in Desert Ridge? I understand, Your Honor. And the two vehicles? The Mercedes and the Range Rover? Yes, Your Honor. And the business known as Harlan Horizon Properties, LLC, along with all associated assets, holdings, and revenue streams? The room seemed to hold its breath. This was the crown jewel. This was the entity Grant had used to define his worth as a man. Giving this up was supposed to be the death blow to my financial future. I lowered my head, letting a curtain of hair fall forward to hide the complete lack of tears in my eyes. Yes, Your Honor. I want him to have it. I want him to have all of it. I just want peace. I heard a scoff from the gallery. It was soft, but audible. Marjorie. She likely viewed my surrender as pathetic weakness. Judge Keller sighed. He looked disappointed. He hated seeing women get rolled over. But he could not force me to fight if I refused to swing back. He turned his gaze to the other table. Mr. Harlan, the judge said. Grant stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, puffing out his chest. Yes, Your Honor. I see here that Mrs. Harlan has waived her right to a forensic accounting of the business assets. However, I also see a reciprocal waiver here for you. The judge tapped a specific page in the thick binder in front of him. Have you been advised of your right to an independent audit of the liabilities and assets before assuming full sole ownership? You understand that by finalizing this today, you are closing the discovery window? Grant let out a short, arrogant laugh. It was a sound that bounced off the mahogany walls. He looked at Preston, then back at the judge. Your Honor, with all due respect, I built that company from the ground up. I know every brick. I know every account. I do not need an audit to tell me what my own empire is worth. So you are declining the independent review? Absolutely, Grant said. He shot a look at me, a look of pure condescension. My wife, she was never good with the numbers. It is better if I just take it all off her hands. It is too complex for her. I bit the inside of my cheek. I was a forensic accountant. I had been top of my class. I had spent a decade finding money that powerful men tried to hide. Grant knew this. Or at least, he used to know this before he decided I was nothing more than a housekeeper who birthed his son. But arrogance has a way of erasing other people's competence from your memory. Very well, Judge Keller said. He sounded bored now. If both parties are in agreement, and no one is acting under duress, we can proceed to the execution of the agreement. The clerk stood up and brought the heavy document to the plaintiff's table first. This was the moment. I watched Grant. He picked up his pen, a heavy black Mont Blanc, that he loved to show off in meetings. He didn't just sign, he performed. He scrawled his signature with a flourish, the ink dark and permanent. He was signing the deed to the house. He was signing the title to the cars. He was signing the full ownership of the company. He was grinning. It was a predatory, satisfied grin. He handed the pen back to the clerk as if he were tipping a bellboy. Your turn, Kennedy, he said across the aisle. Don't shake too much. I stood up and walked to the podium where the clerk had placed the document. My hand was steady. I picked up the cheap ballpoint pen provided by the court. I looked at the paper. I looked at Grant's signature, sprawling and dominant. I signed my name, Kennedy Gray. I did not use his last name. I had already legally requested to drop it in the previous motion, a detail he had barely noticed because he was too busy counting the assets he was keeping. I put the pen down. Thank you, Mrs. Gray, the clerk said. I returned to my seat. My heart rate had not increased by a single beat. The clerk took the document back to the judge's bench, but first, she had to verify the exhibits for the record. She handed a copy to Preston Vale for a final verification of the addendums. Preston looked bored. He had won. He flipped open the binder to the back, just to ensure the notary stamps were in the right places. He turned a page, then another, and then it happened. It was a tiny movement, a twitch. Preston Vale's hand froze in midair. He was looking at page 42, section C, paragraph 9. I saw the color drain from his face. It didn't happen all at once. It started at his ears and moved inward, leaving him looking sickly pale under the fluorescent lights. His jaw, which had been so tight with confidence, suddenly went slack. He blinked. He leaned closer to the paper, as if he couldn't believe what he was reading, as if the words might rearrange themselves if he squinted hard enough. He looked up at me. For the first time in this entire process, Preston Vale actually looked at me, not past me, not through me. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the dawn of a terrifying realization. He looked at the date on the attached exhibit. He looked at the signature on the waiver Grant had just signed, the waiver acknowledging that he had refused due diligence. Preston turned to Grant. He didn't whisper this time. He hissed. "Grant." "What?" Grant was still beaming at Sienna in the gallery, giving her a small thumbs up. "Grant," Preston said, his voice straining to stay low but rising in pitch. "Did you read the liabilities addendum on the sheer logic holdings?" "I told you. I know my business," Grant said dismissively, still not looking at the paper. "It's fine. We won. Preston, relax." "No," Preston said. He grabbed Grant's arm. The grip was hard enough to wrinkle the suit jacket. "Grant, you need to look at this." But it was too late. The machine of the court was already churning. Judge Keller nodded to the clerk. "Please read the summary of the Asset and Liability Division for the record so we can conclude." The clerk, a woman with reading glasses on a chain and a voice devoid of emotion, cleared her throat. She began to read. "The court recognizes that the petitioner, Grant Harlan, shall retain 100% ownership of the marital residence at Desert Ridge." Grant smiled. 100% ownership of the 2024 Mercedes S-Class and the 2023 Range Rover. Grant nodded, tapping his fingers on the table. "And 100% ownership of Harlan Horizon Properties, LLC, inclusive of all inventory, trademarks, and future earnings." "There it is," Grant whispered loudly enough for me to hear. "Done." The clerk took a breath. She turned the page, the same page Preston was currently staring at with the expression of a man watching a car crash in slow motion. "Furthermore," the clerk continued, her voice droning on, relentless and indifferent, "pursuant to the binding clause of total asset absorption, the petitioner, Grant Harlan, hereby knowingly and voluntarily—" Preston Vale tried to stand up. "Your Honor, I object." "Sit down. Mr. Vale," Judge Keller snapped. "The documents are signed. Let the clerk finish." Preston sank back into his chair. He looked like he might vomit. The clerk adjusted her glasses. "Knowingly and voluntarily assumes full and sole legal responsibility for all existing liens, commercial debts, and outstanding loans attached to said entities." Grant's tapping finger stopped. "Including the primary commercial line of credit in default with Canyon Crest Bank in the amount of $4.2 million. Grant's head snapped toward the clerk. His mouth opened. "And the secondary unsecured bridge loan with Pioneer Meridian Lending," the clerk continued, not pausing for Grant's shock. "Currently 3 months past due, in the amount of $1.8 million. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the air conditioning and the blood rushing in my own ears. Grant turned to look at me. The smugness was gone. The arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a confusion so profound it looked like brain damage. I didn't look away. I didn't hide. I sat up straight, dropping the posture of the defeated wife. I let my shoulders square. I let the intelligence I had hidden for 3 years flood back into my face. I smiled at him again, but this time, it wasn't a tremble. It was a blade. The clerk wasn't finished. "Total assumed liability amounts to $6 million, plus pending interest and penalties. The respondent, Kennedy Gray, is hereby held harmless and released from all financial obligations regarding these debts, effective immediately upon the signature provided 47 seconds ago." Grant looked at his hand, the hand that had just held the Mont Blanc pen. The hand that had signed his life away because he was too busy staring at his own reflection to read the paper. Wait, Grant said. His voice cracked. It was a high, thin sound. That is not right. That is a mistake. It is no mistake. Mr. Harlan, I said. My voice was clear, calm, and carried to every corner of the room. You said you knew what your empire was worth. Now you do. Grant looked at Preston. Preston covered his face with his hands. Marjorie gasped in the back row. The sound was like a balloon popping. I saw Sienna lower her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. The selfie forgotten. Grant scrambled to his feet, his chair screeching backward against the floor. She tricked me! Your Honor, she tricked me! Judge Keller looked over his spectacles, unimpressed. Mr. Harlan, I asked you specifically if you wanted an audit. You told me you built it. You told me you knew every brick. But I didn't think she knew about the... Grant was stammering, drowning. You didn't think I knew about the loans you took out to cover the losses? I asked softly. You didn't think I knew about the second mortgage you forged my signature on? Or the investors you lied to? Forged? Judge Keller's eyebrows shot up. Counsel, what is she talking about? Preston Vale looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and die. He knew exactly what this meant. If they contested the debt now, they opened the door to fraud charges. If they accepted the debt, Grant was bankrupt. It was checkmate, and I had won without moving a single pawn until the very end. Grant looked around the room, wild-eyed. He looked at his mother. He looked at his mistress. And finally, he looked back at me. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the silence of a man realizing that the ground he was standing on had been gone for a long time, and he had only just looked down. $6 million. Grant, I whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. Thank you. To understand why I smiled in that courtroom, you have to understand the silence of the house I lived in 3 years ago. It was a sprawling, stucco beast of a home in North Phoenix, tucked away in a gated community near Desert Ridge, where the driveways were paved with pavers and the lawns were manicured to within an inch of their lives. On the surface, it was the American dream, packaged in beige and terracotta. We had the saltwater pool with the waterfall feature that ran on a timer. We had the outdoor kitchen with the Viking grill that Grant insisted on buying but rarely used. We had the neighbors who waved from their Teslas, and the homeowners association that sent polite letters if your garbage cans were left out past 4 p.m. on pickup day. From the outside, we were the Harlans, successful, young, golden. Inside, I was slowly suffocating. Before I was Mrs. Harlan, I was Kennedy Gray, a forensic accountant who could track a single dollar through a shell company in the Caymans and back to a bank account in Delaware without breaking a sweat. I loved the logic of numbers. Numbers were honest. People lied. Lawyers spun narratives. And husbands omitted truths. But the math always balanced eventually. Then came Eli. When our son was born, Grant sat me down in our living room, holding my hand with a tenderness that felt genuine at the time. He told me that I had worked hard enough. He told me that his business, Harlan Horizon Properties, was finally taking off. He said he wanted Eli to have his mother, not a nanny. He painted a picture of a life where I did not have to stress about tax seasons or audits, where my only job was to nurture our family. I believed him. That was my first mistake. By the time Eli was 7 years old, the dynamic of our marriage had calcified into a rigid, unspoken hierarchy. Grant was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets hoping to catch a little bit of his gravity. The rule was simple. Grant made the money, so Grant controlled the money. I did not have access to the main checking accounts. I did not see the bank statements. Those went to a post office box I did not have a key for, or they were delivered electronically to an email address I could not access. Instead, I had a supplementary credit card. It was a platinum card, shiny and heavy, but it came with a psychological limit that was lower than the credit limit. Every time I swiped it at the grocery store or the gas station, I knew a notification popped up on Grant's phone. Did we really need $300 at Whole Foods? he would ask over dinner, casually, while cutting into a steak I had just cooked. I am just trying to keep us on budget. Kennedy, you have no idea what the overhead is on the new development. I would shrink. I would explain about the price of organic produce or the cleaning supplies. I, a woman who used to audit Fortune 500 companies, was reduced to justifying the cost of laundry detergent. But the true symbol of my erasure was the door to his home office. It was a heavy door, solid oak, situated at the end of the hallway on the first floor. When we first moved in, it was just a room, but over the last 2 years, it had become a fortress. Grant had installed a keypad lock on the handle. Not a simple privacy lock, but a commercial-grade keypad. Every evening when he came home, he would disappear into that room. I would hear the beep, beep, beep of the code, the heavy clunk of the deadbolt retracting, and then the door would close. Click, that sound, that sharp, mechanical click of the lock engaging from the inside. It became the soundtrack of my marriage. It was the sound of a wall going up. It was the sound of a conversation ending before it began. Client confidentiality, he told me when I asked why he needed to lock himself in. I am dealing with sensitive investors. Kennedy, you know how it is. If I leave a file out and the cleaning lady sees it, or Eli draws on it, we could lose millions. It made sense, technically, but emotionally, it was a cold slap in the face. I was not the cleaning lady. I was his wife. I was a trained accountant. But to him, I was a liability. This separation bled into his relationship with Eli. Eli was a sensitive boy, quiet and observant, with eyes that saw too much. He worshipped his father. He waited for him. There was a Tuesday evening that is burned into my memory with the clarity of a photograph. Eli had a reading recital at school. It was a small thing, just second graders reading their short stories. But to Eli, it was the Oscars. Grant had promised to be there. He had promised in the morning, while drinking his espresso, checking his watch, and barely looking at us. I will be there. Buddy, front row. The recital started at 6 in the evening. I sat in the folding chair in the school gymnasium. Holding a space for Grant, I kept checking my phone. 6:10, 6:15, 6:30. Eli stood on the risers. He looked for us. I waved, smiling broadly, trying to fill the space of 2 parents with just one body. I saw his eyes scan the room, searching for the tall man in the expensive suit. He didn't find him. Eli read his story about a robot who wanted a dog, his voice wavering slightly. But he got through it. When we got home, Grant's car was in the driveway. The hood was still warm. I found him in the living room, watching a basketball game, a glass of bourbon in his hand. You missed it, I said, the anger simmering low in my gut. Grant didn't even turn his head. Meeting ran long. Big potential with the Scottsdale group. I can't just walk out. Kennedy, this pays for the school. It pays for the house. He was waiting for you. He is 7, Grant said, taking a sip. He won't remember. I went upstairs to tuck Eli in. He was sitting up in bed, his favorite book, a worn copy of a space adventure, resting on his knees. Did Dad come home? He asked. He is working really hard for us. Baby, I lied. It tasted like ash in my mouth. He loves you so much, Eli nodded, but he didn't look convinced. He laid the book on the nightstand. It is okay, Mom. I can read to myself. That was the night I stopped crying over my marriage. I realized that tears were a waste of hydration. Grant was not overwhelmed. He was indifferent. I needed an exit strategy, but exit strategies require capital, and I had none. So, I went back to work, but I did it in the shadows. I reached out to an old contact, a woman named Sarah who ran a boutique firm called Redwood Ledger Solutions. I told her I needed work, but it had to be remote. It had to be under the table or paid into a separate account, and it had to be invisible. Sarah didn't ask questions. She knew talent when she saw it. She started sending me forensic audits for messy divorces and corporate embezzlement cases. I worked when the house was asleep, after Grant locked himself in his office, and after Eli was dreaming of robots. I would sit at the kitchen island with my laptop. I didn't use the home Wi-Fi. I used a personal hotspot I paid for with a prepaid card. I reviewed balance sheets, traced hidden assets, and flagged discrepancies for other women who were being lied to by their husbands. It was ironic. I was helping strangers find the truth while living in a lie. The money wasn't much at first, just a few $100s here and there. I opened a digital bank account that sent no paper statements. I felt like a spy in my own kitchen, listening for the sound of the office door opening. If I heard the lock click, I would close the laptop and pretend to be browsing recipes or shopping for shoes. Grant never caught me. He was too absorbed in his own performance to notice mine. But the cracks in his performance were starting to show. It started with the small things, the sensory details that didn't add up. Grant had always been a creature of habit. He wore navy suits. He liked a specific brand of sandalwood cologne. But suddenly, there were changes. He came home one evening wearing a tie I had never seen before. It was a bold, silk pattern, brighter than his usual taste. When I asked him about it, he touched the knot reflexively. "Oh, this? A client gave it to me. A thank you gift." Then there was the smell. It wasn't perfume on his collar. Grant was too careful for the cliches of a cheap soap opera. It was the absence of smell. He would come home at 9 in the evening smelling of absolutely nothing. Not sweat, not the office, not the stale air of a conference room. He smelled like soap, like he had showered at the gym before coming home. Who showers at 9 at night before coming home to their wife? A man who is washing away the evidence. And the meetings, the investor dinners multiplied. They became 3 nights a week, then 4. My mother-in-law, Marjorie, was no help. She came over on Sundays for the obligatory family barbecue, treating my home like an inspection site. One Sunday afternoon, she stood by the sliding glass door, watching Grant grill burgers. She sipped her iced tea and looked at me with that pitying, condescending expression she had perfected. "He works so hard," Marjorie said, shaking her head. "You are lucky, Kennedy. Most men would resent having a wife who just sits." "I don't just sit, Marjorie," I said, keeping my voice even. "I raise his son. I manage this house." "Yes, well," she sniffed. "Anyone can hire a housekeeper. It takes a visionary to build an empire. Grant creates everything we see here. You are just a passenger. You should try to be a more grateful passenger." I bit my tongue until I tasted copper. A passenger. That is what they thought I was. A mute, grateful passenger in the luxury vehicle of Grant's life. But passengers have the best view of the road, and passengers notice when the driver starts swerving. The breaking point, or rather, the awakening, happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before the final separation. Grant was in the kitchen, packing a bag. He told me he had a conference in San Diego, a developers summit. He was humming to himself, a rare display of good cheer. "I will be back Friday," he said, checking his phone. "Might have bad reception. The hotel is right on the cliffs." "Which hotel?" I asked. I was unloading the dishwasher. "The Del Coronado," he said. "That is nice," I said. "Maybe Eli and I could come? He loves the beach." Grant froze. Just for a second. No. It is strictly business. No kids. Boring seminars all day. You would hate it." He zipped up his leather weekender bag. He looked at me, his eyes bright, distracted. "Besides," he said, "Sienna booked the executive suite, so we will be in meetings until late." The air in the kitchen went still. I froze with a plate in my hand. Sienna. He had never mentioned a Sienna before. He had an assistant named Martha. He had a partner named David. He had a legal counsel named Preston. "Sienna?" I asked. Grant blinked. I saw the gears turn in his head, the panic flare and then instantly get smothered by his arrogance. He realized his slip, but he decided to power through it rather than retreat. "The new consultant," he said smoothly, too smoothly. "I told you about her. She is handling the branding for the new commercial complex. Sharp kid?" "I don't recall you mentioning her," I said. "You don't listen when I talk business. Kennedy," he said. turning the accusation back on me. That is why I stopped trying. Anyway, I have to go. He kissed me on the cheek. It was a dry, perfunctory peck. I watched him walk out the door to the garage. I watched the taillights of the Range Rover fade down the street. I stood there in the kitchen, the silence of the big, empty house pressing in on me. 3 years ago, hearing another woman's name drop so effortlessly from his lips would have shattered me. I would have collapsed on the floor. I would have sobbed. I would have wondered what she had that I didn't. But as I stood there, holding a clean white dinner plate, I realized something that made my spine straighten. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel jealousy. I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt clarity. Sienna, consultant, San Diego. I put the plate away in the cupboard. I walked over to the calendar on the fridge and marked the dates he would be gone. Then, I walked down the hallway to his office door. Click, locked. I stared at the keypad. For 3 years, I had respected the lock. I had respected the boundary. I had played the role of the trusting, submissive wife because I thought that was the price of keeping my family together. But the family wasn't together. Grant had already left it. He just hadn't moved his furniture out yet. I went back to the kitchen, opened my laptop, and logged into my secret work email. I composed a message to a friend of mine who worked in hotel reservations. Subject: Inquiry. Can you check a manifest for the Hotel del Coronado for this weekend? Looking for a Grant Harlan or a Sienna Price? I didn't know her last name yet, but I knew I would find it. I wasn't the grieving wife anymore. I was the forensic accountant. And the audit had just begun. It was a Tuesday night, 3 days after Grant had left for San Diego with his consultant, when the architecture of my life finally collapsed. It did not happen with a bang or a scream. It happened because of a permission slip for the Arizona Science Center. Eli had remembered at 10 in the evening, just as he was drifting off to sleep, that his class trip required a signed waiver by morning. I remembered seeing Grant sweep a pile of mail and loose papers off the kitchen island 2 days prior, muttering about clutter. He had carried the stack into his office to file it. I stood in the hallway, staring at the oak door. The house was silent. The air conditioning hummed its low, monotonous note. I expected the door to be locked. It was always locked. The keypad usually stared back at me with its mocking red light, a digital guardian of Grant's secrets. I reached out, fully expecting the handle to resist. I was already planning how to explain to Eli's teacher that his father had locked the paperwork in a fortress, but the handle turned. There was no beep, no resistance. The mechanism gave way with a smooth, silent glide. Grant, in his haste to pack his bags and rush to the waiting arms of Sienna Price, had been careless, or perhaps the battery in the lock had simply died. A small mechanical failure that would cost him everything. I pushed the door open. The office smelled of him, stale espresso and that aggressive sandalwood cologne. It was a masculine space, decorated in dark leather and mahogany, designed to impress people who never actually visited. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I didn't want to alert the neighbors or wake Eli. I used the flashlight on my phone, the beam cutting a sharp white cone through the darkness. I moved to the desk. It was a chaotic mess. For a man who claimed to be a master of organization, Grant's workspace was a disaster zone. Blueprints were rolled up haphazardly. Invoices were shoved into piles. I scanned the surface for the permission slip. It wasn't there. I checked the top drawer, pens, paper clips, a box of mints. I checked the middle drawer, client files, neatly labeled. Then I opened the bottom drawer on the right side. It stuck slightly, jammed by something jammed deep in the back. I tugged it harder. It slid open, revealing a graveyard of unopened envelopes. They were not the polite, white envelopes of standard business correspondence. These were the aggressive, windowed envelopes that demand attention. Red stamps, bold fonts, the visual language of panic. Final notice, immediate action required, notice of default. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. This was the instinct I had honed over a decade of forensic accounting. It was the physical sensation of finding the anomaly. I sat down in Grant's leather chair, the leather creaking under my weight. I put the phone flashlight face down on the desk so it cast a diffused glow over the papers. I picked up the first envelope. It was from Canyon Crest Bank. I opened it. My hands were steady. I was not a wife snooping anymore. I was an auditor at a crime scene. The document was a demand for payment on a commercial line of credit. I scanned the columns, my eyes skipping over the legal threats and landing on the numbers. Principal balance, $4,200,000. Status, 60 days past due. Arrears, $84,000. I stared at the number, $4 million. Grant had told me the business was liquid. He had told me we were expanding. He had bought a $70,000 car last month. I picked up the next envelope. Pioneer Meridian Lending. I knew this firm. They were not a bank. They were a hard money lender. The kind of place you went to when the banks stopped taking your calls. Their interest rates were predatory, bordering on criminal. It was a bridge loan, $1.8 million. Interest rate, 12%. Collateral listed. Primary residence, North Phoenix. The air left my lungs. He had leveraged the house where my son was currently sleeping, the house that was supposed to be our sanctuary. I kept digging. I pulled out document after document. It was a cascade of financial ruin. There were credit card statements for accounts I didn't know existed. Maxed out with charges for hotels, jewelry stores, and high-end restaurants. There were letters from a collections agency regarding unpaid vendor fees for lumber and concrete. Grant wasn't just broke. He was underwater. He was drowning. And he was standing on my head to keep his nose above the surface. I cleared a space on the desk. I needed to see the timeline. I arranged the letters chronologically, from left to right. February, March, April. The despair accelerated in May. The borrowing became frantic in June. Then I saw it. It was a loan modification agreement from Canyon Crest Bank, dated 6 months ago. It was a document agreeing to extend the credit limit by another $500,000. Using the business assets as security, it required the signature of all officers of the LLC. I saw Grant's signature, that looping, arrogant scrawl, and right below it, I saw mine, Kennedy Gray Harlan. The ink was black. The slant was slightly to the right, to an untrained eye. It looked like my handwriting. It had the same curvature on the K, the same sharp finish on the Y. But I had never seen this document before in my life. I leaned closer, holding the light inches from the paper. I looked at the pressure points of the pen strokes. When people sign their own name. The muscle memory creates a fluid, consistent pressure. When someone forges a signature, there are microscopic hesitations, tiny pools of ink where the pen pauses while the brain calculates the next curve. There was a hesitation at the top of the G. There was a tremor in the H. It was a forgery, a good one, practiced, but a forgery nonetheless. Grant had signed my name. He had made me a co-guarantor on a debt that was currently suffocating us. I felt a wave of nausea, hot and acidic, rise in my throat. This wasn't just financial infidelity. This was a felony. This was fraud. I grabbed my phone. My fingers flew across the screen. I didn't call the police, not yet. The police deal with crimes after the fact. I needed someone who understood the architecture of the bank that was crushing us. I dialed Nora Whitfield. Nora and I had gone to business school together. She was now a senior compliance officer at a regional bank in Scottsdale. It was 11:15 at night. She answered on the second ring. "Kennedy, is everything okay?" "No," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Hollow, metallic. "Nora, I need you to wake up. I need you to listen to me very carefully." "What is it? Is it Eli?" "It is Grant. I am in his office. I found the mail." There was a pause on the other end. Nora had never liked Grant. She had once told me, over wine, that he smiled like a man who was rehearsing a smile in a mirror. "What did you find?" "Kennedy?" "Final notices," I said. "Canyon Crest, Pioneer Meridian, hard money, millions, Nora. He is in for over $6 million. $6 million? Nora hissed. On a residential development firm? In this market? Where did the money go? I don't know, I said, looking at the credit card statements that listed charges at the Del Coronado and Gucci. Actually, I think I do know, but that is not the worst part. I took a breath. I found a modification agreement. My name is on it. Did you sign it? Nora asked sharply. The friend was gone. The compliance officer was present. No. Are you sure? Sometimes they slip papers in with tax returns or… I am sure. I cut her off. I audit signatures for a living, Nora. The pressure is wrong. The spacing is off. He forged it. He made me a co-borrower. Silence stretched between us. I could hear Nora shifting in her bed. The rustle of sheets. Kennedy, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. If your name is on that debt, the bank doesn't care who held the pen. Not initially. If they call that loan, they will come for everything with your name on it. Your savings, your retirement, even your future wages. I know, I said. You have to report this, Nora said. You have to file a police report for identity theft and fraud. Tonight, right now, you have to establish a timeline that proves you were unaware. I looked at the papers spread out on the desk like an autopsy of my marriage. I looked at the sheer volume of the deception. If I call the police now, I said, thinking through the logic, they arrest him. The assets get frozen immediately. The banks trigger the acceleration clauses. The house gets seized as evidence or collateral. Eli watches his father get handcuffed in the driveway. He is a criminal, Kennedy, Nora argued. He is, I agreed. But if I blow this up tonight, I am standing in the blast zone. I need to defuse it first. I need to know exactly how deep the hole is before I try to climb out. What are you going to do? I am going to document everything, I said. I am going to build a case so airtight that when I finally drop the match, I will be the only one wearing a fire suit. Kennedy, that is dangerous. If you know about the fraud and you don't report it immediately, they could argue you were complicit. They can argue whatever they want, I said, picking up the next envelope, but numbers don't lie, and I am going to find every single one of them. I hung up. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the lamp against the wall, even though I wanted to. I went to work. I pulled my phone back out. I stood over the desk and began to photograph every single document. I made sure the dates were visible. I made sure the final notice stamps were clear. I took close-ups of the forged signatures. I moved with the efficiency of a machine. Click, flip, click, flip, click, flip. I created a hidden folder on my cloud drive, encrypted with a password Grant would never guess. The date of the day I realized I didn't love him anymore. I found bank statements that showed transfers to a shell company called Harlan Consulting. I photographed them. I found the appraisal for the house that had been ordered without my knowledge. I photographed it. I found a receipt for a diamond bracelet purchased 2 weeks ago. I photographed it. As I worked, the picture became clearer. Grant wasn't just bad with money. He was a narcissist who believed that reality could be bent to his will if he just spent enough cash. He had built a facade of success using bricks made of dynamite, and he had handed me the lighter without telling me what it was. By 2 a.m, I had digitized the entire contents of the drawer. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I placed the Canyon Crest envelope at the bottom. Angled slightly to the left, I stacked the Pioneer Meridian letters on top. I shoved the drawer until it stuck, reproducing the jam. I wiped the desk where my elbows had rested. I wiped the handle of the drawer. I walked out of the office and closed the door. I listened for the click. It didn't lock. Of course, the battery was still dead. I went upstairs to Eli's room. He was sleeping soundly. His limbs sprawled out in the shape of a starfish. He looked so peaceful. He had no idea that his roof was leveraged. His father was a fraud, and his mother was plotting a war. I kissed his forehead. I got the permission slip, baby, I whispered. I went to my own bedroom. The bed was huge and empty. I lay down, staring at the ceiling fan cutting through the dark. I thought about the tears I should be crying. A normal wife would be crying. A normal wife would be heartbroken that her husband was a liar and a thief who was sleeping with a consultant in San Diego. But I wasn't a normal wife anymore. I was an adversary. I didn't shed a single tear. Instead, I closed my eyes and began to organize the columns in my head. Assets on the left, liabilities on the right. Grant was a liability, and like any bad debt, he needed to be written off. I reached for the notebook I kept in my nightstand drawer. I clicked my pen. I wrote the date at the top of the page. Entry 1, I wrote, The Discovery. That night, I didn't cry. I started a ledger. The morning after I discovered the financial wreckage in Grant's desk, I did not confront him. I did not pack his bags. I did not scream. Instead, I drove 30 minutes out of my way to a credit union in Mesa, a place where no one knew the name Harlan, and opened a checking account in my maiden name. The branch was quiet, smelling of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. When the teller asked for my initial deposit, I handed her $400 in cash, money I had siphoned from the grocery budget over 2 months. It was a pathetic sum compared to the millions Grant was hemorrhaging, but as I watched the teller count the bills, I felt a strange, vibrating thrill. This was not just money, it was oxygen. I opted for paperless statements, set to go to a new, encrypted email address. I declined the debit card because plastic leaves a trail. I wanted this money to be a ghost. This was the beginning of the long game. For the next 3 years, I lived 2 distinct lives, by day. I was the dutiful, slightly faded trophy wife. I drove the SUV to soccer practice. I hosted the dinner parties where Grant would tell exaggerated stories about his conquests in the commercial real estate market. I nodded at the right times. I laughed when the other wives laughed. I poured wine and played the part of the woman who had everything, all while knowing that the roof over our heads was leveraged to within an inch of foreclosure. By night, or during those precious hours when Grant was pretending to work and Eli was at school, I was building a fortress. My closet became my archive. I bought a fireproof box and hid it inside a garment bag that held an old winter coat I never wore. Into this box went everything. Every time a collection letter arrived, I intercepted it, photographed it, and then resealed it so Grant would never know I had seen it. I printed out emails from my secret forensic work. I downloaded the metadata from the photos I took of his office. I created a timeline of his debts that was more detailed than anything his own accountant probably possessed. I treated my marriage like a hostile corporate takeover. I was the auditor, and Grant was the failing CEO who didn't know he was already fired. 6 months into this double life, I realized I needed a general. Nora, my friend in compliance, met me for coffee at a place with no windows. She slid a piece of paper across the table. Janine Kessler, Nora said, keeping her voice low. She is not the kind of lawyer you see on billboards. She does not have a catchy slogan. But if you want to surgically remove a tumor without killing the patient, she is the one you call. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday. Janine's office was in a nondescript building in downtown Phoenix. There was no marble in the lobby, no waterfalls, no intimidating abstract art. Her office was small, cluttered with case files, and smelled of peppermint tea. Janine herself was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, wearing a cardigan that had seen better days. She looked like a librarian, but her eyes were like lasers. I sat down and placed my dossier on her desk. I didn't say a word. I just let her read. Janine flipped through the pages. She looked at the photos of the foreclosure notices. She looked at the evidence of the forged signature on the bridge loan. She looked at the timeline of the consulting trips to San Diego. After 10 minutes, she closed the folder and took off her reading glasses. "Most women come in here crying," Janine said. Her voice was dry, devoid of the soft sympathy professionals usually offer to grieving wives. "They want me to tell them it will be okay. They want me to tell them their husband is a monster. They want therapy." I sat straighter. "I don't need therapy. I have a gym membership for that." Janine's lips twitched. It was almost a smile. "Good, because I charge $450 an hour, and that is too expensive for crying. So tell me, Kennedy, what is the goal? Do you want to punish him, or do you want to escape him? I want to be free, I said. And I want to make sure that when the wall falls, it falls on him, not on me or my son. Janine nodded. She tapped the file. This forgery? This is your nuclear option. We could use it now. We could have him arrested. But if we do that, the assets freeze. The bank seize the house immediately. You are out on the street with a 7-year-old, and your husband is in jail, unable to pay child support. I know, I said. That is why I waited. Smart, Janine said. We need a strategy of containment. We need him to believe he is winning right up until the moment he signs his name. We need to let his ego do the heavy lifting for us. That became our mantra. Let his ego do the work. I went home and studied Grant. I watched him like a biologist studying a predator in a cage. I learned to read the correlation between his spending and his panic. When Grant came home with 3 new tailored suits from Italy, costing $4,000, I knew he had missed a payment on the construction loan. The suits were armor. He needed to look successful to convince himself he wasn't drowning. When he leased the new Range Rover, trading in a perfectly good vehicle for one that cost $2,000 a month, I knew the secondary lenders were calling. He needed the new car to show up at meetings and Project Dominance. He became louder. His stories at dinner became more grandiose. He talked about legacy and empires constantly. It was a fascinating, terrifying display. The more empty the bank account became, the more noise Grant made to fill the void. We are looking at a $10 million valuation by next quarter, he told my father at Thanksgiving, carving the turkey with a manic energy. Kennedy doesn't worry her pretty head about it, but we are crushing the market. My father looked impressed. I just chewed my turkey and calculated the interest accumulating on the 4 different credit cards Grant had used to pay for the dinner. But the hardest part wasn't the silence. It was Eli. Eli was growing up in a house that felt like a movie set. Everything looked real. But if you leaned on a wall, it might fall over. I made a vow that my son would not feel the tremors. I became the master of distraction. If Grant was locked in his office, screaming into the phone at a creditor, I would turn up the music in the kitchen and we would have a dance party while making pancakes. Is Daddy mad? Eli asked one evening, looking at the ceiling as Grant's voice boomed through the vents. No, honey, I said, flipping a pancake. Daddy is just rehearsing a speech. He has to be very loud so the people in the back can hear him. I took Eli to soccer practice 3 times a week. I sat on the sidelines, cheering, cutting orange slices, chatting with the other moms about school fundraisers. I never let the mask slip. I never hinted that my husband was a fraud. I protected Grant's reputation with the ferocity of a lioness, not for his sake, but for Eli's. I didn't want my son to be the kid whose dad was the neighborhood pariah. Not yet. I saved every penny I earned from my secret work at Redwood Ledger Solutions. The account in Mesa grew. $1,000, $5,000, $12,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a safety net. It was the first month's rent on an apartment. It was food. It was the ability to say no. As the 3 years wound down, the pressure in the house became physical. Grant was barely sleeping. He had bags under his eyes that no amount of expensive moisturizer could hide. He started drinking more, expensive scotch, pouring it with a shaking hand. He started picking fights, trying to goad me into reacting. He wanted me to be the villain. If I was the nagging, ungrateful wife, then his infidelity with Sienna and his financial incompetence were justified. He needed an excuse. You don't support me, he sneered one night, standing in the kitchen, swaying slightly. You have no idea the pressure I am under. You just take and take. I was washing a dish. I didn't turn around. I know you work hard. Grant, I appreciate everything you do. You don't know anything, he shouted, smashing his glass into the sink. I cleaned up the glass. I didn't yell back. I didn't give him the fight he wanted. I gave him nothing but a mirror to reflect his own ugliness. The week before I finally filed for divorce, I went back to Janine's office. The file on her desk was now 3 inches thick. "We are ready," Janine said. "He is desperate. He needs to refinance the entire portfolio. But he can't do it with you on the title because your credit score is still good, and he has trashed his... He needs you off the books so he can find a shady lender who will overlook the mess for a high interest rate." "So he wants the divorce," I said. "He needs the divorce," Janine corrected. "He needs to own everything solely so he can mortgage it solely. That is his only play. He thinks if he gets the house and the company, he can borrow his way out of the hole." She pulled out a draft of the settlement agreement. It was a dense, 20-page document. "This is standard," Janine said, pointing to the first few sections. "But here, this is the trap." She pointed to a paragraph on page 18. It was buried in a wall of text about indemnification and liability assumption. "The indivisibility clause," Janine said, tapping the paper with her pen. "Usually, couples fight to split things. You take the house, I take the savings. You take the debt, I take the car. But Grant is greedy. And more importantly, he is arrogant. He wants to show the world he won. He wants to strip you of everything." "Yes," I said. "He told me he wants to leave me with nothing." "So we give him what he wants," Janine said. Her eyes were hard and bright. "We draft the agreement so that the assets and the liabilities are fused together. One entity. If he takes the company, he takes every single debt attached to it, known and unknown. If he takes the house, he takes the liens. He cannot cherry-pick the fruit and leave the rot." "He won't read it," I said. "He never reads the fine print. He thinks he is smarter than the lawyers." "Exactly," Janine said. "He will see that he gets the millions in assets. He will be so busy high-fiving himself that he won't notice he is also assuming the $6 million in bad debt. And the best part? We add a hold harmless provision. Once he signs, if the bank comes after you, he is legally required to pay your legal fees and pay off the debt himself. It shifts the entire burden onto his shoulders." I looked at the document. It looked like a surrender. It looked like I was walking away naked into the cold. But to anyone who understood the language of money, it was a life raft. "It is a risk," Janine warned. "If he actually hires a competent forensic accountant, they will see this. They will tell him to run." "He won't," I said. "He fired his good accountant last year because the man asked too many questions. Now he uses a yes man who just files what Grant tells him to file." "And the lawyer? Preston Vale?" "Preston is a shark," I said. "But he is lazy. He likes easy wins. And Grant lies to him. Grant tells Preston the business is booming. Preston won't dig if his client tells him there is gold." Janine closed the file. "Then we set the stage. We let him think he is robbing you. We let him think you are weak, stupid, and scared. Can you do that? Can you sit there and let him gloat while you hand him a grenade?" I thought about the 3 years of silence. I thought about the lock on the door. I thought about the forged signature and the consultant in San Diego. I thought about my son waiting for a father who never came. "I have been practicing for 3 years. Janine," I said, "I am ready for my performance." I stood up to leave. "One more thing," Janine said. "When he takes everything, say thank you." I looked at her. "Psychological closure," she said. "It disarms them. If you fight, they check their defenses. If you thank them, they lower their shield." I walked out into the bright Phoenix sunlight. I drove to the bank in Mesa and deposited another $200. Then I went to pick up Eli from school. "How was your day, Mom?" he asked, climbing into the back seat with his dusty cleats. "It was good, baby," I said, adjusting the rearview mirror so I could see his face. "I think we are going to have a really good year." I drove home to the house that wasn't mine, to the husband who wasn't mine, and prepared to lose everything so I could finally win. The invitation to dinner at my mother-in-law's estate in North Scottsdale was not a request. It was a summons to a public execution. Marjorie Harlan lived in a house that looked like a museum dedicated to the concept of beige. It was a cavernous, echoing place filled with white orchids that were replaced weekly and furniture that was too expensive to sit on comfortably. For a decade, I had been the dutiful daughter-in-law at this table, nodding at her passive-aggressive critiques of my parenting and smiling through her lectures on how to support a great man. But tonight, the dynamic had shifted. Tonight, I was not the guest of honor. I was the audience. Grant walked in first. He was wearing a charcoal suit that I knew cost $3,000 because I had seen the credit card charge on the secret statement I archived 3 days prior. He looked energized, practically vibrating with the manic confidence of a man who is frantically trying to outrun his own shadow. And then, she walked in. Sienna Price. Grant had the audacity to introduce her not as his mistress, but as his lead consultant for strategic branding. It was a title so hollow it practically echoed. She was wearing a dress that was tastefully expensive, a soft cream silk that clung to her in all the right places, and she carried a Hermes Birkin bag that looked stiff, as if it had been purchased that very morning. I stood by the fireplace, holding a glass of sparkling water, watching the performance. Marjorie did not just greet Sienna. She anointed her. She swept across the marble foyer with her arms wide open, bypassing her own son to embrace this stranger. "You must be Sienna," Marjorie cooed, pulling back to admire the woman who was sleeping with her son while he was still married to me. "Grant has told me so much about your vision. Finally, he has someone who understands the scope of his ambition." Sienna smiled. It was a practiced smile, tight at the corners. She had clearly rehearsed this moment in the mirror. "It is an honor to meet you, Mrs. Harlan. Grant says you are the backbone of the family." "Oh, please, call me Marjorie," my mother-in-law said, beaming. Then, Marjorie turned to me. The warmth vanished from her face instantly, replaced by the cool, dismissive expression one might give to a caterer who had dropped a tray. "Kennedy," she said, her voice dropping an octave, "we are ready to sit down. Why don't you go into the kitchen and help Maria bring out the salad? You know how I like the dressing served on the side. You are so good at the domestic things." The insult was precise, surgical, and delivered with a smile. She was establishing the hierarchy. Sienna was the intellectual equal, the partner, the future. I was the help. I saw Grant smirk. He adjusted his cufflinks, waiting for me to make a scene. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to throw my drink. He wanted proof that I was the unstable, emotional anchor dragging down his ship. I did not give him the satisfaction. "Of course, Marjorie," I said smoothly. "I would be happy to." I walked into the kitchen. My pulse was steady. As I picked up the heavy crystal salad bowl, I wasn't thinking about the humiliation. I was analyzing the data. I had noticed Sienna's shoes. They were Louboutins, brand new, the soles unscuffed. I had noticed the bracelet on her wrist, a Cartier love bracelet, the screw-on kind that signifies permanent commitment. I did a quick mental calculation. The bag, the shoes, the jewelry. That was roughly $25,000 of inventory walking around on a woman's body, paid for by a man who was currently dodging calls from a hard money lender about a $1.8 million debt. Sienna wasn't a partner. She was a liability. She was just another item Grant had purchased on credit to make himself feel powerful. When I returned to the dining room, the seating arrangement had been altered. Usually, Grant sat at the head, and I sat to his right. Tonight, Sienna was sitting in my chair. Eli was already seated across from them. He looked small in the high-backed chair, his eyes darting between his father and the woman in the cream dress. He looked confused. I set the salad down on the sideboard. I walked over to the empty chair on the far side of the table, the spot usually reserved for guests or children. "Mom?" Eli asked. His voice was small, cutting through the chatter about real estate trends. "Why is she sitting in your seat?" The room went silent. Grant cleared his throat. Looking annoyed that reality had intruded on his fantasy, Sienna froze, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. "It is okay, buddy," Grant said quickly. "Sienna and I need to discuss some work things during dinner. Mom doesn't mind. Mom likes it down there. It is quieter. Eli looked at me, his eyes welling up with the injustice of it. I smiled at my son. It was the only genuine smile in the room. Daddy is right, Eli. I like it here. I can see you better from this angle. And remember what I told you? It doesn't matter where I sit. Nothing is more important than you. I am right here. I saw a flicker of shame on Sienna's face. She looked down at her plate. She was young, and perhaps she had convinced herself this was a great romance, but in that moment, she realized she was an intruder. Grant, however, felt no shame. He launched into a monologue about the new paradigm of his business. He spoke of the Harlan Horizon project as if it were a guaranteed gold mine. Kennedy just never understood the leverage required, Grant said to his mother, gesturing with his wine glass. She is risk-averse. She thinks small. Sienna gets it. You have to spend money to make money, right? Absolutely, Sienna said, her voice a little too eager. It is about projecting strength. Grant? Exactly, Marjorie agreed, casting a pitying glance at me. Some women are built for the background. Kennedy, there is no shame in that. Grant needs a partner who can stand in the spotlight. I ate my salad. I chewed slowly. Projecting strength, that was their phrase. But I knew the truth. Grant wasn't projecting strength. He was projecting panic. The entire dinner was a performance art piece designed to reassure Marjorie, who I suspected had also loaned him money, that everything was fine. The fallout from that dinner didn't stay inside the house. It bled out into the streets of North Scottsdale. Over the next week, the atmosphere at Eli's school changed. The drop-off line is a vicious ecosystem, fueled by gossip and lattes. I felt the shift on Tuesday. I was walking Eli to the gate when I waved to a mother I had known for 3 years. We had planned playdates. We had shared wine. She didn't wave back. She pretended to be engrossed in her phone, turning her shoulder to block me out. Later, I overheard 2 women talking near the cafeteria. Heard she is trying to take him for everything, one whispered. Grant told my husband she is demanding half the business even though she hasn't worked a day in 7 years. I heard she is mentally unstable, the other replied. That is why he had to bring in that consultant, to save the company from her negligence. Grant was rewriting history. He was painting me as the gold digger, the leech, the anchor. He was telling anyone who would listen that I was the reason things were tight right now, that my demands were stalling his genius. It hurt. I won't lie and say I was made of stone. To be villainized by the man I had supported for a decade was a sharp, biting pain. But I stored that pain in the same place I stored the bank statements. I let it fuel my focus. Let them talk. Let them think I was the greedy, incompetent wife. It made me invisible, and invisibility was my greatest weapon. Then came the phone call that confirmed my entire theory. It was Thursday morning. I was in the kitchen, packing Eli's lunch, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. This is Kennedy. Hi, Kennedy. It is Sienna. Her voice was soft, laced with a faux sweetness that set my teeth on edge. Hello, Sienna, I said. I didn't ask how she got my number. Grant gave her everything else. Why not my privacy? Look, I know this is awkward, Sienna began. But I wanted to reach out, woman to woman. I think there has been a lot of tension, and I just want you to know I have zero ill will toward you. That is very big of you, I said flatly. Sleeping with my husband and sitting in my chair usually creates a little tension. We are in love, Kennedy, she said, her voice hardening slightly. But that is not why I am calling. I am calling because, well, Grant is really stressed. This divorce process is dragging out, and it is hurting everyone, especially Eli. She used my son's name. I gripped the countertop so hard my knuckles turned white. What is your point, Sienna? My point is, she sighed, you need to sign the papers. Grant is trying to be generous, but you are holding up the liquidity. We have investors, major institutional investors, who are ready to back the new project, but they won't sign until the marital assets are untangled. They need a clean title on the LLC. I stopped breathing for a second. There it was. The smoking gun. She had just handed me the key to the entire puzzle. Investors are waiting for clean title, I repeated, keeping my voice dumb and passive. Yes, Sienna said, sounding relieved that I seemed to understand. We have a bridge loan that is maturing in 3 weeks. Kennedy, if the divorce isn't finalized by then, the refinancing falls through. Grant is trying to protect your assets, too. If that loan matures without the new funding, things get complicated. I see, I said. So he needs the divorce decree to close the new loan. Exactly, she said. He needs to show he has sole ownership so he can use the equity. So, really, if you care about the family's future, you should just tell your lawyer to accept the offer. Stop fighting over the percentages. Just let him have the business so he can save it. I almost laughed. It was so transparent. Grant had sent her to do his dirty work, probably telling her to use the soft touch. But she was an amateur. She had just admitted that they were on a deadline. They weren't just impatient to be married. They were drowning. They had 3 weeks before a bridge loan, probably the one from Pioneer Meridian, exploded. They needed my name off the title so they could leverage the property to the hilt with a new lender who didn't know about the forgery. Thank you for telling me this, Sienna, I said. I didn't realize the timeline was so critical. It is, she said. So you will sign? I will talk to my lawyer, I said. I certainly don't want to stand in the way of Grant's success. Good, she said. That is really big of you. Kennedy, Grant said you would be difficult, but I told him you sounded reasonable. I am very reasonable, I said. Goodbye, Sienna. I hung up the phone and stared at the kitchen wall. Grant was terrified. That was why he was parading Sienna around. That was why he was spreading rumors. That was why he was offering to take everything. He wasn't trying to hoard wealth. He was trying to consolidate collateral. He needed the house, the cars, and the company under his name solely, not because they were valuable, but because they were the only things he had left to pawn. He needed me to sign a document that gave him full ownership, and because he was in a rush, he wouldn't read the clauses that came with that ownership. I picked up an apple and placed it in Eli's lunchbox. I felt a sense of calm settle over me, cool and absolute. They wanted speed? I would give them speed. I would give them exactly what they asked for, wrapped in a bow of submission. I thought about the advice Janine had given me. Let his ego do the work. Grant and Sienna were running toward a cliff, thinking it was a finish line. All I had to do was step aside and hold the ribbon for them. When someone pushes you to sign a contract quickly, it is never because they are excited. It is because they are afraid that if you take the time to turn on the light, you will see the cockroaches. I was ready to turn on the light, but not until the ink was dry. The negotiation meeting took place in the conference room of Preston Vale's law firm. A space designed to intimidate, the table was a slab of black marble that looked like a tombstone, and the view from the 34th floor offered a panoramic look at the heat haze rising off Phoenix. Grant sat at the head of the table, flanked by Preston and a junior associate who looked terrified. I sat on the opposite side, with Janine next to me. Grant did not look at me. He looked at his watch. He tapped his fingers on the marble. He was radiating the energy of a man who had somewhere better to be, specifically a meeting with a lender to sign papers for a life he could no longer afford. Let us cut to the chase, Grant said, his voice booming in the acoustically perfect room. I am not interested in a drawn-out battle. Kennedy, I have businesses to run. I have assets to manage. I want this done fast, and I want it done clean. We all want a resolution. Grant, Janine said calmly, what are your terms? Grant leaned forward. I want the house in Desert Ridge. I want the Mercedes and the Range Rover. I want sole ownership of Harlan Horizon Properties and all subsidiary LLCs. I want the retirement accounts associated with the business. He paused, waiting for the reaction. He expected me to gasp. He expected me to fight for the house I had decorated, for the car I drove, for the company I had helped build in the early days before I was relegated to the kitchen. I kept my face blank. And the custody arrangements? I asked softly. Grant waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. You take Eli. Obviously. I will see him when I can. But right now, with the expansion and the new projects, I cannot have him every other week. It is too disruptive for him, and frankly, I don't want to deal with the logistics of nannies and school runs. You are better at that stuff. I felt a cold shard of ice pierce my heart. He wasn't fighting for his son. He was negotiating him away like a depreciating asset. He viewed Eli as an overhead cost, time and money he didn't want to spend. He was willing to give me full physical custody not because he was generous, but because he was selfish. So, Janine clarified, writing in her notebook, you are proposing, Mrs. Harlan retains primary physical custody, and you retain 100% of the marital assets? Exactly, Grant said. I will pay the state-mandated child support. Of course, I am not a monster, but the assets are mine. I built them. I maintain them. Preston Vale chimed in, leaning back in his expensive ergonomic chair with a smirk that made me want to reach across the table and slap him. Look, let us be realistic here. Kennedy, you have been out of the workforce for 7 years. You work part-time doing, bookkeeping? Data entry? Remote accounting support, I corrected quietly. Preston chuckled. Right, support. You do not have the financial literacy to manage a portfolio like Grant's. If we split the business, you would run it into the ground in 6 months. Grant is doing you a favor by taking the complexity off your hands. You get the kid. You get the support check. You get a clean slate. You should take it. You part-time workers, Grant added, shaking his head. You don't understand how leverage works. Kennedy, you see a mortgage and you panic. I see opportunity. Just let the professionals handle the money. I looked at Grant. I looked at Preston. 2 men so blinded by their own reflection that they couldn't see the cliff they were standing on. I need time, I said, injecting a tremor into my voice. This is a lot to process. Giving up the house, giving up the company. Grant rolled his eyes. We don't have time. Kennedy, I have deals pending. If you drag your feet, you are hurting the very estate you want a piece of. Just give me 48 hours, I pleaded. Let me review the paperwork with Janine. If the numbers make sense, I will sign. Fine, Grant snapped. 48 hours. But if you come back with a counteroffer asking for the beach house or the stocks, I am pulling the deal and we go to trial, and I will bury you in legal fees until Eli is in college. Understood, I whispered. We left the office. We walked in silence to the elevator. We rode down 34 floors. We walked out to Janine's Honda Civic in the parking garage. Once the doors were closed and the air conditioning was blasting, Janine turned to me. He is desperate, she said. He is terrified. I agreed. He needs that title so bad he can taste it. So, Janine said, putting the car in gear, let us go give him exactly what he asked for. Back at Janine's office. We began to draft the marital settlement agreement. This was not a negotiation. It was an act of architectural sabotage. We were building a beautiful, shiny building that was designed to collapse the moment Grant walked inside and locked the door. The key, Janine said, typing furiously on her laptop, is the indivisibility clause. We are going to grant him 100% of the assets, the house, the cars, the business. It will look like a total victory for him. And the debts? I asked. That is Section C, Janine said. We draft it so that the assets and the liabilities are inseparable. By accepting the asset, the receiver automatically and irrevocably assumes full responsibility for any and all encumbrances, liens, loans, and debts attached to said asset, whether currently disclosed or undisclosed. She looked at me over her glasses. And then we add the hold harmless provision. This is the shield. Kennedy. It states that Grant Harlan agrees to indemnify and hold Kennedy Gray harmless from any claims by third-party creditors. If Canyon Crest Bank comes after you because your name was on a forged document, this clause means Grant has to pay them, and he has to pay your legal fees to fight them. But will it hold up? I asked. If he says he didn't know about the debt? Janine smiled. It was a wolf's smile. That is why we attach Exhibit B. Exhibit B was my masterpiece. It was a 50-page addendum to the agreement. In it, we included copies of every single final notice letter I had photographed in his office. We included the statements showing the $4.2 million default. We included the Pioneer Meridian Bridge loan documents. We are not hiding anything, Janine explained. We are disclosing everything. We are stapling the evidence of his bankruptcy right to the back of the agreement he is going to sign. If he reads it, he will know he is taking on $6 million in bad debt. If he doesn't read it well, the law assumes that a competent businessman who signs a contract has read the attachments. He won't read it, I said. He is too arrogant, and Preston is too lazy. They will see the first page where I give up the house and the company, and they will pop the champagne. There is one more lock we need to turn, Janine said. The waiver of discovery. She pulled up a standard court form, but she modified the language to be more specific. Usually, in a divorce with a business involved, the wife asks for a forensic audit to see what the business is worth, Janine said. Grant is expecting you to ask for that. He is expecting a fight. So we waive it, I said. No, you waive it, Janine corrected. But we also make him waive his right to an independent review of the liabilities. We make him sign a statement saying he is fully aware of the financial state of the company and the household, that he has had the opportunity to investigate, and that he declines to do so because he possesses superior knowledge of the assets. Superior knowledge, I repeated. He loves that phrase. Exactly, Janine said. We use his ego to bind his hands. When the judge sees that Grant signed a paper saying, I know everything, I don't need to check. He cannot come back later and say, she tricked me. I didn't know about the debt. He is certifying that he knows. We spent 10 hours drafting the document. It was dense. It was boring. It was written in the dry, repetitive language of the law that makes eyes glaze over. We buried the assumption of liability clause on page 42, sandwiched between a section about life insurance beneficiaries and a section about dispute resolution arbitration. It looked like boilerplate text. It looked harmless, but the words were specific. The petitioner, Grant Harlan, hereby assumes sole and absolute responsibility for the following debts, and then we listed them. Loan number ending in 452, $4,200,000. Loan number ending in 998, $1,800,000. Credit card debt, $112,000. We listed every single penny. When we were finished, Janine printed the document. It was heavy. It landed on the desk with a solid thud. This is it, Janine said. This is the trap. She looked at me, her expression serious. Kennedy, you need to understand what happens when he signs this. He thinks he is taking the assets, but because the debts exceed the assets by millions, he is technically acquiring a negative value. He is not taking everything. He is taking a grenade that has already had the pin pulled. I know, I said. And once he signs, and the judge stamps it, you are out. You are free. The creditors can chase him until the end of time, but they cannot touch you. But he will be ruined. He will lose the house. He will lose the business. He will likely face criminal charges for the fraud when the banks realize what he did. He made his choice, I said. He chose to forge my signature. He chose to mortgage our home. He chose Sienna. I am just letting him keep the results of his choices. Janine nodded. She handed me a pen to sign the petitioner's copy, the copy we would present to them in court. You have to sell it, Kennedy, Janine warned. In court, you have to look defeated. You have to look like the part-time worker who is just too overwhelmed to fight. If they smell even a hint of confidence, Preston will read that document. Don't worry, I said, thinking of the red dress Sienna had worn, and the way Grant had looked at me as if I were a piece of furniture he was discarding. I know exactly how to play the loser. Good, Janine said. She tapped the stack of papers. Because if he signs this, he is not just taking the house. He is hugging the hole, and he is going to pull the dirt in right on top of himself. 2 days before the court date, Marjorie summoned me to her home for what she called a family reconciliation meeting. The email subject line simply read, "Final terms." I knew exactly what this was. In the world of high-stakes negotiations, this is known as the squeeze. It is the moment when the opposing side puts you in a room, outnumbers you, and uses psychological pressure to crush whatever resistance you have left. They wanted to make sure I wouldn't flinch in front of the judge. They wanted to strip mine my dignity one last time to ensure compliance. I arrived at 7 in the evening. The desert heat was just beginning to break, leaving the air thick and heavy. When I walked into Marjorie's dining room, I almost laughed. The stage management was so transparent it was pathetic. The long mahogany table had been cleared of its usual centerpieces. Grant sat at the head of the table, his back to the large window, framed by the sunset like a deity. Marjorie sat to his right. Sienna sat to his left. And my seat? They had placed a single, armless chair at the very foot of the table, 10 feet away from them. There was no water glass at my place setting. There was no notepad, just the chair, isolated on the Persian rug. I walked in with my head lowered, clutching my purse against my chest like a shield. I sat down, keeping my knees together, shrinking into the small space they had allotted me. "Thank you for coming, Kennedy," Marjorie began. She didn't look at me. She looked at Grant, as if seeking his approval to speak to the help. We felt it was necessary to gather one last time to ensure everyone is aligned. "There is no alignment, Mother," Grant said, his voice bored and irritated. "There is just reality. Kennedy needs to accept it." He looked at me then, his eyes cold and flat. "Preston tells me you are still reviewing the paperwork. It has been 48 hours. Kennedy, it is not war and peace. It is a standard dissolve. You sign, you leave, you get the child support." "I just wanted to be sure," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It is a big decision, giving up everything." Sienna sighed loudly. She picked up a pen and tapped it against the table. "See? This is what I was talking about. Grant, she is stalling. She is hoping if she drags this out, you will throw in the beach house just to make her go away." "I am not giving her the beach house," Grant snapped. "That is a legacy asset." "She doesn't deserve the beach house," Marjorie chimed in. "Kennedy, look at this room. Look at this family. Grant built this life. He worked 18-hour days. He took the risks. You simply lived in the house he paid for. You drove the cars he leased. And now you think you are entitled to walk away with half of his genius?" They were talking about me as if I weren't there. It is a classic dehumanization tactic. If you talk about a person in the third person while they are sitting right in front of you, you turn them into an object, an obstacle. "I don't think I'm entitled to his genius," I said softly. "Then sign the damn papers," Grant said. "I am being generous. Kennedy, I am letting you keep Eli without a fight. Do you know how much a custody battle costs? I am saving you $50,000 right there. You should be thanking me." I bit the inside of my cheek. He was letting me keep Eli because Eli was inconvenient to his new lifestyle, but I nodded. "I know, Grant, I appreciate that." "She keeps saying she appreciates it, but she hasn't signed," Sienna said. She leaned forward, and the light caught the diamond necklace she was wearing. It was new. "We have deadlines. Kennedy, real business deadlines. We can't have our capital frozen because you are feeling sentimental about a house you didn't pay for." "What deadlines?" I asked, keeping my face innocent. Sienna rolled her eyes. "The Silverleaf project, the condo closing. We need the liquidity to—" Grant shot her a look, a sharp, warning glare. "Sienna, she doesn't need the details." But it was too late. The breadcrumb had been dropped. Silverleaf. Silverleaf was one of the most exclusive, expensive enclaves in Scottsdale. If they were closing on a condo there, they were looking at a purchase price of at least $3 million. And since Grant was currently drowning in debt, he couldn't possibly qualify for a conventional mortgage. That meant he was using hard money again, or he was planning to use the equity from the Desert Ridge house, the house I was about to sign over to him, to secure the down payment. He needed the divorce decree to prove he owned the house 100%. Without my name off the title, he couldn't leverage it for the next loan. He wasn't just broke. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and now he was trying to rob me to pay Peter. "I am sorry," I said, looking down at my hands. "I didn't know you were moving." "We are upgrading," Grant said, puffing out his chest. "New chapter, bigger things. You wouldn't understand the scope of it. Kennedy, it is institutional-level investing." "It sounds impressive," I said. Marjorie clasped her hands. "It is visionary, and that is why we cannot let your hesitation ruin it. Kennedy, listen to me. If you force this to trial, Grant's lawyers will destroy you. They will paint you as an unfit mother. They will bring up your lack of employment. They will question your stability. We will bury you," Grant added calmly. "Preston has a file ready to go. We will petition for full custody just to spite you. Do you want to lose Eli?" The threat hung in the air. This was the line they shouldn't have crossed. Threatening my assets was one thing. Threatening my son was an act of war. But I didn't explode. I didn't scream that I had a folder in my cloud drive that could send Grant to federal prison for bank fraud. I didn't scream that I had recorded every single conversation where he neglected his son. I took a deep breath. I let my shoulders slump. I let a single tear, which I had been holding back for this exact moment, slide down my cheek. "No," I whispered. "Please, I don't want to lose Eli. He is all I have." "Then sign," Grant said. He slid a copy of the agreement down the long table. It stopped just within my reach. "Tonight, right now." I looked at the document. It was the old draft, the one Preston had prepared, not the one Janine and I had modified. "I can't sign this copy," I stammered. Janine made some formatting changes, to the font size and the margins, for the court filing. She is very particular. "Formatting?" Grant laughed. "Who cares about formatting?" "I promised her," I said, my voice trembling. "She said if I sign the wrong version, the clerk will reject it, and we will have to start over. It will delay everything by weeks." The word delay hit them like a physical blow. "Weeks?" Sienna hissed. "We don't have weeks." "Fine." Grant slammed his hand on the table. "Take it to your obsessive lawyer. But I want the signed copy on my desk by 9 a.m. on the day of the hearing, not a minute later." "I promise," I said. "I will sign it. I will give you everything. Just please don't take Eli." "As long as you cooperate," Grant said, leaning back, satisfied with his victory. "I am a reasonable man. Kennedy, I just want what is mine." "Thank you, Grant," I said. I stood up. I walked out of the house. I didn't look back at Marjorie, who was already pouring champagne to celebrate my surrender. The next 24 hours were a blur of calculated precision. Preston Vale, apparently feeling that the meeting hadn't been enough, began sending emails to Janine. They were aggressive, nasty little missives designed to keep the fear alive. Email from Preston Vale. 9:15 a.m. Client is losing patience. If the executed agreement is not received prior to the hearing, we will move for an emergency ex parte hearing regarding custody. Email from Preston Vale. 2:30 p.m. Please remind your client that spousal support is a negotiation, not a right. The current offer is off the table if she delays. Janine printed every single one of them. "Keep them coming, Preston," she muttered, sliding the emails into the case file. Every threat he makes proves duress, but it also proves that they are not reading the paperwork we sent over. They are so focused on bullying you into signing that they haven't bothered to check what you are signing. Meanwhile, I kept the house completely normal for Eli. We made tacos for dinner. We practiced his spelling words. I washed his soccer uniform and folded it neatly on his bed. I didn't want him to feel the seismic shift that was about to happen. "Are we really moving, Mom?" he asked that night, as I tucked him in. "Yes, baby," I said. "But it is going to be an adventure. We are going to a place that is just ours. No more big, empty rooms. It will be cozy, and we can get a dog. A dog? His eyes lit up. Grant had never allowed pets. He said they scratched the floors. A dog, I promised. A scruffy one. I had already put a deposit down on a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex 10 miles away. It wasn't prestigious. It had laminate countertops and a shared pool. But the rent was within the budget of the forensic accounting job I had secretly accepted full-time starting next month. It was clean, it was safe, and most importantly, my name was the only one on the lease. The night before the hearing, I sat in the living room of the Desert Ridge house for the last time. The house was silent. Grant was staying at the Del Coronado with Sienna again, celebrating early. I had the final version of the marital settlement agreement on the coffee table. It was the one Janine and I had crafted. The trapdoor. I turned to page 42. There it was. The assumption of liability clause. The list of debts. The hold harmless agreement. It was all there, in black and white, waiting for a signature. I took a small, yellow sticky note. I placed it on the edge of the page, marking the spot where Grant would need to initial. I wasn't hiding it. I was flagging it. I was saying, "Here it is. Look at it." But I knew he wouldn't look. He would see the yellow flag and assume it was just another formality, another box to check on his way to the bank. I picked up the pen. I signed my name on the respondent line, Kennedy Gray. My hand didn't shake. I closed the binder. I turned off the lights in the living room. I walked up the stairs in the dark, knowing every step by heart, knowing that I would never walk down them again as a victim. Grant wanted a stage? Fine. Tomorrow. I would give him the performance of a lifetime, and when the curtain fell, he would be the only one left standing in the dark. The night before the final hearing, I did not sleep in the master bedroom with the vaulted ceilings and the silk sheets that Grant had insisted on importing from Italy. I slept in the guest room, on a mattress that was too firm, surrounded by boxes that I had packed and hidden over the last 3 weeks. But my mind was not in that house. My mind was 10 miles away, in a second-floor apartment at a complex called The Arbors. It is a modest place. It has 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a galley kitchen that Grant would have laughed at. The countertops are laminate, peeling slightly at the corners, and the carpet is a shade of beige that is designed to hide stains rather than impress guests. The view from the balcony is not of a golf course or a mountain range. It is of the parking lot and the community dumpster. But to me, it is the most beautiful place on earth. I had spent the last few afternoons there while Eli was at school, moving things in bit by bit. I had stocked the pantry with the cereal Eli likes, the sugary kind Grant forbade because it didn't fit the elite image of his son. I had bought soft, cheap towels from Target that actually absorbed water, unlike the Egyptian cotton ones in the mansion that just pushed the moisture around. The most important feature of that apartment is the refrigerator. In the mansion, our refrigerator was a stainless steel monolith that cost $8,000. It was always spotless. Grant had a rule that nothing could be magnetized to the front of it. No drawings, no report cards, no reminders. He said it looked cluttered and low rent. In my new apartment, the refrigerator is a white, humming box from 1998, and right now, it is covered. I had taken every single drawing Eli had made in the last year. The robots, the dinosaurs, the stick figure family portraits where the father figure was always drawn a little too far away from the rest of us, and I had taped them up. I used magnets shaped like letters. I used Scotch tape. When I look at that fridge, I don't see clutter. I see evidence of life. I see a home where a 7-year-old boy is allowed to leave his mark. That is the difference between being rich in money and being rich in peace. Grant was chasing the former while drowning in debt. I was about to claim the latter. I sat on the floor of the guest room in the mansion, the marital settlement agreement resting on my crossed legs. The house was quiet, that heavy pressurized silence that comes before a tornado touches down. I opened the binder to page 42. I had read this page 100 times, but I needed to read it 101 times. I needed to trace the words with my finger to make sure they hadn't changed. Clause 7. C. Assumption of liabilities. The petitioner, Grant Harlan, acknowledges that he has waived his right to an independent audit and hereby accepts full and sole responsibility for all liabilities attached to the marital estate, including but not limited to commercial loans, private liens, and unsecured debts, holding the respondent, Kennedy Gray, harmless from any future claims. It was a beautiful sentence. It was a sentence that carried the weight of $6 million. Grant, in his haste and arrogance, would see the words sole responsibility and think it applied to the assets. He would think it meant he was the sole king of the castle. He wouldn't realize that the castle was built on a sinkhole, and he had just agreed to be the only one standing inside when it collapsed. I closed the binder. The trap was set. The bait, my feigned weakness, was in place. I stood up and walked to the closet to choose my armor for the morning. In court, appearance is a language. If you dress too well, you look like you don't need support. If you dress too poorly, you look unstable. I needed to thread the needle. I needed to look like the part-time worker Grant and his lawyer had mocked. I needed to look like a woman who was tired, defeated, and just wanted to go home. I chose a gray cardigan. It was soft, unstructured, and made my shoulders look smaller. I chose a pair of black slacks that were a little loose, suggesting I had lost weight from stress. I chose flat shoes. Grant hated when I wore flats. He liked me in heels because he said it improved my posture. Tomorrow, I would wear flats. I would be grounded. Then, I opened my jewelry box. Most of the expensive pieces were gone. Grant didn't know it yet. But I had sold the diamond tennis bracelet and the sapphire earrings 2 months ago to fund the deposit on the apartment and the retainer for Janine. I had replaced them with high-quality cubic zirconia replicas. He would get those in the settlement. He could try to pawn them later. It would be a fitting end to his facade. But there was one ring I kept. It was not valuable in the traditional sense. It was a thin gold band with a tiny chipped garnet stone. It had belonged to my grandmother, a woman who had raised 4 children on a seamstress's wage during the 1950s. She wore it every day until she died. Grant had always hated this ring. "Why do you wear that thing?" he would ask when we were getting dressed for a gala. "It looks cheap. It ruins the aesthetic of the diamond I bought you." He never understood. The diamond he bought me was bought on credit to impress strangers. This ring was paid for with sweat and survival. I slipped the garnet ring onto my right hand. It felt warm against my skin. It was my talisman. It was a reminder that I came from a line of women who knew how to make a life out of scraps, while Grant was a man who knew how to make a ruin out of a fortune. I walked down the hall to Eli's room. The door was ajar. The hallway light cast a long, thin slice of illumination across his bed. He was asleep, tangled in his Spider-Man sheets. One arm hanging off the side of the mattress, I sat down on the floor next to his bed. I didn't touch him. I didn't want to wake him. I just watched the steady rise and fall of his chest. This was the why. It is easy to get lost in the anger. God knows. I was angry. I was angry that my husband had lied to me. I was angry that he had forged my signature. I was angry that he had introduced his mistress to my son at a dinner table. But anger is a fuel that burns dirty. It smokes and it chokes you. I couldn't run on anger. I had to run on protection, if I stayed. The creditors would eventually come for the house. The marshals would come to evict us. Eli would watch his toys being carried out to the curb. He would watch his father unravel. By leaving, by orchestrating this surgical extraction, I was building a lifeboat. When Grant's ship went down, and it was going to go down, with or without my help, Eli would be safe on dry land. He would have a mother who was solvent, sane, and present. Eli stirred in his sleep. He mumbled something unintelligible, smacked his lips, and then said one word clearly. "Pancakes." I smiled in the dark. He was dreaming of breakfast. He wasn't dreaming of bridge loans or foreclosure notices or branding consultants. He was dreaming of pancakes. "I promise, baby," I whispered. "We will have pancakes. We will have so many pancakes." I want to pause here for a moment. I want to speak directly to you, if you are reading this, and you are sitting in a house that feels like a prison. Listen to me. If you have a partner who tells you that you are bad with money, or that you don't understand the business, or that you should just sign the paper without reading it, stop. They rely on your fatigue. They rely on your fear of conflict. They want you to believe that you are small so that they can feel big, but you are not small. You are just quiet. And silence is not a weakness. Silence is a container. You can put a lot of things in that container. You can put plans in there. You can put evidence in there. You can put your exit strategy in there. Don't scream. Don't fight back in the way they expect. When they push, don't push back. Step aside. Let them stumble into the space you vacate. And ask yourself this: have you ever been underestimated? Because if you have, you know that it is the greatest superpower in the world. Being underestimated gives you invisibility. It gives you time. And in a war, time is more valuable than ammunition. Grant thought I was a fool. He thought I was a part-time worker who couldn't understand a balance sheet. He was about to find out that I was the one balancing the books. I went back to the guest room. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Grant. Grant, ends tomorrow. Be at the courthouse by 8:45. Don't be late. It was a command, not a conversation. No good night. No kiss Eli for me. Just a logistical directive from a CEO to a subordinate. I typed my reply. I didn't type a paragraph defending myself. I didn't type a plea. I typed 2 letters. Kennedy. Okay. I set the phone down. A moment later, another message came through. This one was from Janine. Janine. The file is submitted to the clerk. The judge has the docket. The trap is primed. If he signs, the court will record it immediately. Get some sleep. I turned off the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. Save for the ambient light of the city filtering through the blinds, I walked to the window and looked out. Phoenix sprawled out before me. A grid of amber lights shimmering in the heat. Somewhere out there was the courthouse. Somewhere out there was the bank that held the $4 million note. Somewhere out there, Grant was probably toasting with Sienna, thinking he had won. For the first time in 3 years, the knot in my stomach was gone. I wasn't scared. I wasn't anxious. I felt the way a demolition expert feels right before they press the button. The explosives are rigged. The perimeter is clear. The calculations have been triple-checked. All that is left to do is watch the structure fall. I climbed into the guest bed and pulled the duvet up to my chin. I closed my eyes and visualized the signature page. Respondent, Kennedy Gray. Petitioner, Grant Harlan. Tomorrow, he would take everything, and I would smile, and I would say thank you, and then I would be free. The courtroom was colder than I remembered. It was a sterile, windowless box designed to reduce human lives to paper stacks and court orders. I arrived exactly 3 minutes before the scheduled time, walking in with the slow, measured steps of a woman who was walking to the gallows. Grant was already there. He stood at the plaintiff's table, leaning against the heavy oak wood with the casual grace of a man hosting a cocktail party. He wore a navy suit that was tailored so sharply it could have cut glass. His hair was perfectly gelled, his shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and his face was illuminated by a smile that was equal parts relief and triumph. He looked like a man who had already spent the money he was about to win. Behind him, in the front row of the gallery, sat the audience for his coronation. Marjorie Harlan sat with her spine rigid, clutching a designer handbag as if it contained the crown jewels. She wore a suit of aggressive pastel pink, a color that tried to scream innocence but only managed to look artificial. Beside her was Sienna Price, the consultant. She had toned down her wardrobe for the court, wearing a modest black dress, but her eyes were darting around the room with hungry excitement. She leaned over and whispered something to Marjorie, and the two of them shared a conspiratorial nod. They looked like two investors waiting for the opening bell of the stock market. I walked to the defendant's table. Janine was already there, arranging her files with military precision. She didn't look up as I sat down. She just slid a single piece of paper toward me. A tissue. in case I decided to play the part of the weeping wife. "Showtime," Janine whispered, her lips barely moving. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Keller entered the room. He was a man with a face like a topographic map, etched with the lines of 1,000 failed marriages. He took his seat, adjusted his spectacles, and looked down at us with a mixture of boredom and pity. "Case number 49221, the clerk announced. "Harlan versus Harlan. Final dissolution hearing." Grant straightened his tie. He shot a look at me across the aisle. It wasn't a look of hatred. It was a look of pity. It was the look a wolf gives a sheep right before the kill. Not malicious, just accepting the natural order of things. "We are here to finalize the marital settlement agreement," Judge Keller said, shuffling the thick binder of documents we had submitted. "I understand the parties have reached a mutual agreement regarding the division of assets and liabilities." "We have, Your Honor," Preston Vale said. Standing up, his voice was smooth, confident. He was already thinking about his lunch reservation. "My client, Mr. Harlan, has generously agreed to a settlement that expedites the process." "Generously," Grant muttered under his breath. Loud enough for his mother to hear, Judge Keller turned his gaze to me. His eyes were sharp behind the lenses. "Mrs. Harlan, I have reviewed the document. It is unusual. You are surrendering your claim to the marital residence, the entirety of the business holdings, and the associated investment accounts. You understand that Arizona is a community property state? You are entitled to 50% of the value of these assets." I stood up slowly. I kept my hands clasped in front of me to hide the fact that I was gripping my own knuckles until they turned white. "I understand, Your Honor," I said. My voice was soft, trembling just the right amount. "Has anyone forced you to sign this?" the judge asked. "Has anyone threatened you, or coerced you, or promised you anything outside of this agreement to make you agree to these terms?" I looked at Grant. He was staring at the ceiling, looking bored. "No, Your Honor," I said. "I am signing this of my own free will. I just want to move on." "Very well," the judge said. Though he still looked skeptical, he turned to the other table. "Mr. Harlan?" Grant stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Yes, Your Honor." "I see here a reciprocal waiver," Judge Keller said, tapping the document. "Specifically, Exhibit D, the waiver of independent discovery and appraisal. You are agreeing to take full possession of the business entities known as Harlan Horizon Properties, LLC, and all subsidiaries, without an independent forensic audit of the books." "That is correct," Grant said. "Mr. Harlan," the judge continued, his voice dropping to a warning tone, "the court advises all parties to conduct full due diligence before assuming sole ownership of a business. If there are discrepancies in the valuation, or if there are hidden liabilities you are unaware of, you will have no recourse once this gavel comes down. Are you absolutely certain you do not want to delay these proceedings to have an accountant review the current standing?" Grant laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "Your Honor," Grant said, puffing out his chest, "I built that company. I know every ledger entry. I know every brick. I don't need to pay some outsider $300 an hour to tell me what I already know. I am fully aware of the value of my estate." I watched Preston Vale. Preston was smiling, but as Grant spoke, I saw a tiny flicker in his eyes, a micro-expression of doubt. Lawyers are trained to be paranoid, and Grant's absolute refusal to check the books was the kind of arrogance that usually makes a lawyer nervous. Preston reached out and touched the edge of the agreement, his finger hovering over the tab that led to the financials, but Grant was on a roll. "My wife," Grant continued, gesturing vaguely in my direction, "has not been involved in the operations for years. She does not understand the complexity of the portfolio. It is better for everyone if I just take the reins completely." "So you are certifying that you have superior knowledge of the assets and liabilities?" Judge Keller asked. "I am," Grant said. "And you are waiving your right to claim ignorance of any financial details later?" "I am," Grant said. "Let us just get this done." "Very well," the judge said. He nodded to the court clerk. Please read the summary of the asset division into the record so the parties may execute the signature page. The room fell silent. The air conditioner hummed. The clerk, a woman with a voice as dry as parchment, adjusted her microphone. The petitioner, Grant Harlan, shall be awarded 100% interest in the real property located at 1142 Pinnacle Peak Drive. Grant smiled. He winked at Sienna. I saw Sienna mouth the words, our house. And 100% interest in the 2024 Mercedes S-Class and the 2023 Range Rover. Marjorie nodded approvingly from the gallery. She was keeping a tally. And 100% ownership interest in Harlan Horizon Properties, LLC, including all inventory, trademarks, bank accounts, and future revenue streams. Finally, Grant whispered. He picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen he had brought with him. He uncapped it. He was ready to sign. He was vibrating with the need to put his name on the victory. I sat perfectly still. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But my face was a mask of resignation. Preston Vale was watching the clerk. He looked bored. He was already mentally spending his retainer fee, but then, his eyes drifted down to the open binder in front of him. He was on page 41. The clerk was reading from page 41. The clerk took a breath. She turned the page. However, the clerk read, her voice not changing pitch. Pursuant to Clause 7C, regarding the indivisibility of the estate. Preston frowned. He looked down at his copy. He hadn't read this far in the final draft. He had assumed the standard language. He flipped the page. I saw the moment it hit him. It wasn't a sudden gasp. It was a freeze. His hand, which had been resting on the table, went rigid. His eyes narrowed. He read the paragraph. Then he read it again. His mouth opened slightly. Wait, Preston whispered, but the clerk was still reading. The petitioner, Grant Harlan, hereby knowingly and voluntarily assumes full, sole, and absolute responsibility for all liens, debts, commercial loans, and encumbrances attached to said entities. Grant wasn't listening. He was looking at the judge, waiting for the signal to sign. He had the pen poised over the paper. Grant, Preston said, his voice a little louder this time. Grant, hold on. Grant swatted Preston's hand away. Relax, Preston. It is standard boilerplate. Let me finish. No, Preston hissed. He leaned in, panic starting to sweat through his expensive cologne. Grant, you need to read the addendum, the liability clause. I told the judge I know the liabilities, Grant snapped, irritated that his lawyer was ruining his moment in the spotlight. Stop stalling. Grant, look at the number, Preston urged, trying to grab the pen, but Grant was faster. He was driven by a 3-year hunger to own everything. He wanted to secure the house so he could leverage it for the Silverleaf condo. He wanted the company so he could sign the new deal with the investors. He saw the finish line, and he wasn't going to let anyone stop him. I am signing, Grant declared. He pressed the nib of the pen to the paper. The scratching sound was loud in the quiet room. He signed his name with a flourish, a big, looping Grant Harlan that took up 2 lines. There, Grant said, slamming the pen down. Done. Preston Vale slumped back in his chair. He looked physically ill. He looked like a man who had just watched his client walk off a cliff after explicitly telling him the view was great. Signed and witnessed, the judge said. Clerk, please continue the reading for the final record. Grant crossed his arms, beaming. He turned to me. See, Kennedy, that wasn't so hard, was it? Now you can go back to your little apartment. I didn't answer. I just looked at the clerk. The clerk cleared her throat. She looked at the paper. Then she looked at Grant. There was a flicker of confusion in her eyes, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Continuing Clause 7C, she read, the assumed liabilities include, but are not limited to, Grant was still smiling, the primary commercial line of credit with Canyon Crest Bank, currently in default, in the principal amount of $4,200,000. Grant's smile twitched. It didn't disappear, but the corners faltered. He blinked. What? He whispered. The clerk continued, oblivious. And the secondary bridge loan held by Pioneer Meridian Lending. Currently 90 days past due, in the amount of $1,800,000. The color drained from Grant's face. It happened instantly, like a light switch being flipped. The tan he had carefully cultivated at the country club vanished, leaving his skin a sickly grayish yellow. He turned his head to look at Preston. Preston? What is she reading? Preston didn't look at him. Preston was staring at the table, rubbing his temples. And accumulated credit card debt in the amount of $112,000, the clerk droned on. Total assumed liability is $6,112,000. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. Sienna, in the front row, let out a small, strangled sound. $6 million? She whispered. Her voice carried in the dead air. Grant? Grant stood up. His legs bumped the heavy table, shaking the water pitcher. That is not right, Grant stammered. His voice was high, thin, unrecognizable. That is a mistake. I don't owe $6 million. The company is solvent. The document you just signed says otherwise. Mr. Harlan, Judge Keller said, peering over his glasses. You attached Exhibit B yourself, or rather, your counsel did. Grant grabbed the binder. He ripped it open. He flipped to the back, tearing the pages in his frenzy. He found Exhibit B. I watched him. I watched his eyes scan the photos I had taken in his office 3 years ago. I watched him see the final notice stamps. I watched him see the foreclosure warning on the house he had just fought so hard to keep. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide, terrified, and full of a dawning, horrific realization. He realized that I hadn't been ignorant. He realized I hadn't been passive. He realized that for 3 years, while he was playing the king, I had been the historian of his ruin. You knew, he whispered. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I sat perfectly still. I didn't smile yet. I didn't gloat. I just held his gaze. Mr. Harlan, the clerk said, determined to finish her job. The clause concludes, the respondent, Kennedy Gray, is hereby held harmless and indemnified from all claims regarding these debts. The petitioner assumes sole obligation for repayment, effective immediately. No, Grant shouted. No, this is a trick. She tricked me. I didn't read that part. Mr. Harlan, Judge Keller's voice boomed, cutting through Grant's panic. 10 minutes ago, you stood in this courtroom and told me, on the record, that you knew every ledger entry. You told me you knew every brick. You waived your right to an audit because you claimed superior knowledge. But I didn't know she found the letters, Grant yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. She stole them. She went through my desk. So you are admitting the debts are real? The judge asked sharply. You are admitting the letters exist? Grant froze. He realized he had just walked into the second trap. By claiming I stole the evidence, he was authenticating the debt. He looked at Preston. Do something! Preston Vale looked up. He looked at the judge, then at Grant, and finally at the signature on the page, the signature that was still wet. You signed the waiver, Grant, Preston said quietly. You refused the audit. You told the judge you knew. I pay you to protect me, Grant screamed. I tried to stop you, Preston said, his voice cold. You swatted my hand away. Marjorie Harlan stood up in the gallery. She looked like she was having a stroke. Grant? What is happening? The house, my money? Grant? Sienna was already typing on her phone. I could only guess what she was doing. Googling how to break a lease? Checking if her jewelry was returnable? Grant slumped back into his chair. He looked at the paper in front of him, the paper that gave him the house, the car, the business, and the $6 million anchor that would drag them all to the bottom of the ocean. The agreement is ratified, Judge Keller said, banging his gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. Court is adjourned. Grant looked at me one last time. He looked stripped. He looked like a man who had woken up in a burning house and realized he was holding the matches. I stood up. I smoothed my gray cardigan. I picked up my purse. I walked past him. I paused, just for a second, right at his shoulder. I could smell his sweat. It smelled like fear. I leaned in, close enough that only he could hear. "Thank you, Grant," I whispered, "for taking everything," and then I walked out the door. The gavel did not just end the hearing, it ended the era of Grant Harlan. When Judge Keller announced that the agreement was ratified, the sound of the wood hitting the block seemed to physically shatter the air around my husband. Grant shot out of his chair as if he had been electrocuted. His face, usually a mask of composed vanity, was twisted into a rictus of pure panic. "This is a trick," he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She set me up." "Your Honor, you cannot let this stand. She knew about the debt, and she let me sign it." Preston Vale remained seated. He had turned a shade of pale usually reserved for patients in critical condition. He was a lazy lawyer, but he was not a stupid one. He knew exactly what had just happened. He knew that the combination of the voluntary signature, the explicit refusal of the audit, and the superior knowledge claim Grant had made on the record had created a legal cage from which there was no escape. "Sit down, Mr. Harlan," Judge Keller said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "I will not sit down," Grant shouted, his voice cracking. "I am being robbed. That debt, I can't pay that debt. If I take the company with those loans, I am bankrupt. She knows that. She is trying to ruin me." "Mr. Harlan," the judge said, leaning forward, "the court does not exist to protect you from your own confidence. You stood here 5 minutes ago and told me you knew every brick of your empire. You told me you did not need an accountant. You told me my concern was unnecessary. But I didn't read the attachment," Grant pleaded, looking around the room for an ally who wasn't there. "That," Judge Keller said, closing the file with a definitive snap, "is an expensive lesson in due diligence. The order stands. The assets are yours. The liabilities are yours. Mrs. Harlan is dismissed with prejudice regarding any future claims." The bailiff stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt, silently suggesting that Grant should sit down before he was forced down. Grant collapsed into his chair. He looked at the document in front of him, the piece of paper that gave him exactly what he wanted and took everything he had. I did not stay to watch him weep. I picked up my purse. I nodded to Janine. We walked toward the double doors at the back of the courtroom. As we pushed through into the hallway, the reality of the situation spilled out with us. Sienna and Marjorie had followed, their faces masks of confusion and dawning horror. Sienna reached Grant first as he stumbled out of the courtroom, dazed. "Grant," she said, her voice high and tight. "Grant, what was that? What did the clerk mean by $6 million? Grant looked at her, but I don't think he saw her. He was seeing the foreclosure notices. He was seeing the repo men. "It is a mistake," Grant mumbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It is just a clerical error. I will fix it. I always fix it." $6 million in default?" Sienna pressed, grabbing his arm. Her grip wasn't affectionate, it was interrogative. "Grant, you told me the liquidity issue was temporary. You said once you got the title, we could close on the condo. Can we still close?" Grant pulled his arm away. "Not now." Sienna. "Don't tell me, 'not now,'" she snapped. The facade of the supportive consultant dropped, revealing the frightened woman beneath. "My name is on the lease application for the office space. Grant, if you are bankrupt, who pays the rent?" I watched them. It was like watching a play where the actors had forgotten their lines and started screaming the subtext. Marjorie stood a few feet away. She was looking at her son with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It wasn't love. It wasn't pride. It was disgust. She realized that the empire she had bragged about to her country club friends was a hologram. She realized that her son wasn't a genius. He was a gambler who had just lost the house. Marjorie didn't say a word. She adjusted her pink suit jacket, turned on her heel, and walked toward the elevators. She didn't look back. She didn't offer to help. She simply resigned from the position of Grant's mother because the benefits package had been revoked. Grant watched her go. He looked small. The expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume he had borrowed from a bigger man. He turned to me. "Are you happy?" he whispered. The fight was gone, replaced by a hollow shock. "You destroyed me. You knew I couldn't cover those loans without your credit score to refinance. You knew this would kill the business." I looked at him. I looked at the man I had spent 10 years trying to please. I looked at the father of my child who had forgotten to come home for reading recitals. "I didn't destroy you, Grant," I said calmly. "You did this. You borrowed the money. You forged the signature. You lied to the investors. All I did was stop covering for you. I didn't take anything from you. I just gave you the consequences you have been running from." "But $6 million," he choked out. "Thank you for taking it," I said, "because I couldn't carry it anymore." I turned and walked away. I walked down the long marble corridor, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the floor. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was behind me. A man standing in the wreckage of his own ego. The months that followed were not dramatic for me. They were quiet, and in that quiet, I found peace. For Grant, however, the drama was just beginning. I didn't seek out news of his downfall. But in a community as interconnected as ours, the information arrived like weather reports. Nora, my friend in compliance, became the unwilling narrator of his collapse. "It is bad. Kennedy," she told me over coffee 2 months later. Canyon Crest called the note the day after the judgment was filed. They seized the operating accounts. Pioneer Meridian filed a lien on the house within 48 hours. "And the new investors?" I asked, stirring sugar into my latte. "Pulled out," Nora said. "Once they saw the debt load, they ran. The company is in receivership. They are auctioning off the equipment next week. The trucks, the laptops, the office furniture, everything." "And the house?" "Foreclosure started yesterday," she said. "He is fighting it, but without cash flow. He is dead in the water. He is going to lose it." I felt a pang of sadness. Not for Grant, but for the house. I had chosen the paint colors. I had planted the rose bushes. But then I remembered the lock on the office door, and the sadness evaporated. Sienna lasted exactly 3 weeks. Once the Range Rover was repossessed, an event that apparently happened in the parking lot of a high-end restaurant. Much to the delight of the local gossip mill, she realized there was no vision left to brand. She moved back to Los Angeles, leaving Grant to deal with the lease she had panicked about in the hallway. Grant hit rock bottom fast. He had to declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The empire was liquidated to pay pennies on the dollar to the creditors. He moved into a studio apartment in a rougher part of town. He lost his license to develop real estate due to the fraud allegations regarding the forged signature, which the bank discovered during the bankruptcy audit. Just as I knew they would, and he ended up working as a commission-only broker for a budget rental agency. Meanwhile, my life was expanding. I took the job at Redwood Ledger Solutions full-time. When my boss, Sarah, saw the file I had compiled on Grant's finances, the sheer level of detail, the forensic tracking of assets, she didn't just hire me, she made me a senior auditor. "You have a gift for finding the rot," she told me. I moved Eli and myself into a townhouse 6 months later. It wasn't a mansion, but it had a small yard. True to my word, we adopted a dog. He was a terrier mix with messy fur and one ear that stood up while the other flopped down. We named him Buster. Eli was flourishing. Without the tension of a father who treated him like an inconvenience, he became louder, happier. He stopped waiting by the window. He realized that the parent who stayed was the one who mattered. We had pizza nights on Fridays. We did homework at the kitchen table without fear of disturbing important business. We were rich in ways Grant had never understood. It was exactly 1 year after the court date when I got the text. Grant. Can we talk? About Eli? Please. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near my office. Public, neutral, safe. I arrived first. When Grant walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The Grant I knew had been a man of Italian wool suits and spray tans. This man was wearing a polo shirt that was slightly faded and a pair of khakis that he had ironed himself. He had lost weight. His hair was graying at the temples, and the manic energy was gone. He looked tired. He looked human. He ordered a black coffee, no espresso, no specific temperature instructions. He sat down across from me. He didn't check his watch. He didn't look at his phone. He just looked at me. "You look good. Kennedy," he said. His voice was quieter than I remembered. "I am good," I said. "How are you?" He laughed, a dry, self-deprecating sound. "I am surviving. I am selling rentals near the university. It is not glamorous, but it pays the rent." He took a sip of coffee. "I am seeing someone, a therapist. Dr. Evans." I raised an eyebrow. "You? Therapy?" "Yeah," he said. I had a lot of time to think in that studio apartment, about why I needed everyone to think I was a god, about why I treated you like an employee. He looked down at his hands. He wasn't wearing the Patek Philippe watch anymore. His wrist was bare. "I miss him, Kennedy," Grant said, his voice cracking. "I miss Eli. I know I was a terrible father. I know I ignored him. But I want to try. I don't want to be the guy he forgets." I looked at him. I used my auditor's eyes. I looked for the deception. I looked for the angle, but I didn't see one. I saw a man who had been stripped of everything and had finally found the ground. "I am not going to make it easy for you," I said. "I know," he said. "Here are the conditions," I said, pulling a notebook from my purse. I had prepared for this. 1. I need a letter from Dr. Evans confirming you are attending weekly sessions and making progress. 2. You maintain steady employment for 6 months. 3. Visitation is supervised for the first 90 days. We start with 2 hours on Saturday mornings. If you are late, even by 5 minutes, the visit is canceled. Grant nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't say, "Don't you know who I am?" And 4, I continued, you never, ever speak negatively about me or our past to him. You are his father, not his victim. If I hear one word about how Mom took the money or Mom ruined the business, you will never see him again. Do you understand? Grant looked me in the eye. I understand. I won't. I just want to know him. Then we can try, I said. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a year. Thank you. Don't thank me, I said, standing up. Earn it. I walked out of the coffee shop and into the bright Arizona sun. I thought about the title of my story. My husband took everything. And it is true. He took the house. He took the cars. He took the debt. He took the stress. He took the lie we had been living. People often think revenge is about making the other person scream. They think it is about destruction. But as I unlocked my car and saw the booster seat in the back for Eli, I realized they are wrong. True revenge is not about lighting a fire. It is about walking out of the burning building and not smelling like smoke. It is about reaching a place where the person who hurt you no longer has the power to define you. Grant had taken everything I didn't need, and in doing so, he had given me back the only thing that mattered. He took the weight. I smiled, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and whispered it one last time. Thank you, because thanks to him, I was finally, completely free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It has been a long journey from that courtroom to this moment of peace, and I am so grateful I could share it with you. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, while cooking dinner, or maybe winding down for the night? Please leave a comment below and let me know which part of the world you are in. I love reading your stories, and if you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the Leona Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need a reminder that sometimes the best way to win is to let them take everything. Stay strong, and I will see you in the next story.